This is Batman, White Knight, and this is a better version of Batman, White Knight. These are my friends, Russ, Aniki, and Nines, and I asked them how they would fix this Elseworld. I spent the past 2 months combing through this absolute nightmare of a book and collecting the testimonies of my 3 mutuals together, better version. But before we can do that, we have to dig into the pieces of this Elseworld to Frankenstein it into something that doesn't absolutely suck.
In the next 3 videos, I'll be going into this. In this video, we'll rip the book apart to see the filthy guts of the good, the bad, and the ugly. In the next one, we'll figure out what we could do, what we could change, and in the final video, we'll put it all together into one better Murphyverse.
But before we can get into all the nitpicking and haterisms, I'd like to start with what the Murphyverse actually does right. And since this is my video, I'd like my own 2 cents in before we go on to the interviews. Personally, I really did enjoy the original characters of this Elseworld debuts, especially Riot and Gan. In general, I do really like Presents Red Hood. It's mostly separate from the rest of the Elseworld, but one of the most enjoyable parts of the series. The art is consistently incredible and it always manages to match the story completely. The writers are all really good at what they do, and you can see the skill that each of them has. The romance aspects of the Collins written book, with the flashbacks of Harley and Jack, are the crumbs of Riot and Poison Ivy that we've gotten. The twins have so much potential, and I really do hope that this is potentially eventually explored. Presents Harley Quinn holds up pretty well as a separate story from the rest of the Elseworld. The one shot in Harley Quinn Black, White, and Red is cute, though I will say I'm a bit biased. By technicality, Beyond the White Knight book that got me into DC Comics. First comics I ever owned, baby! Now, for what my friends had to say, Russ didn't send in audio, so I'm using text-to-speech for them, while Aniki and Nines are saying their pieces themselves. We'll start with Russ.
I quite like the portrayal of abuse, postpartum depression, child abuse, frick yes, and definitely Marion. She's my favorite. The twins are delightful. Murphy's strong suit is definitely in his OCS. They are interesting and mostly solid. I quite like Marion and Ivy's relationship, they are cute. I enjoyed Collins's and McCormick's work immensely, and Andolfo and Scalera's artwork complemented Collins's softer touch beautifully. I would be lying if I said I didn't laugh at Jack in Beyond a few times. Terry was interesting.
I really like how the art matches the writing, which may be a complete coincidence, but is definitely a happy one. Murphy draws the books he writes on, so his grimdark and edgy writing is matched with his art's sharp edges and points. Collins' softer, kinder writing is matched with Matteo Scalera's gorgeous, wistful work in Presents Harley Quinn. McCormick's writing on Presents Red Hood matched with Simone Di Mio's pencils. McCormick and Collins' writing on Generation Joker matched with Mirka Andolfo's art, which portrays the youth of the twins beautifully and matches the family tone that the book goes for. Also, I adore this take on Harley. It's unique and unsteady, but it's raw and real, and she's a character I can condemn without disliking, root for without dismissing her flaws. She's a really good character, and while she is very far from mainline Harley, and I do not believe she should ever be in mainline, she fits in the White Knight universe in a very fun and interesting way.
So I heard a lot about their reread, and here's onto what Aniki had to say on what they liked.
One of the things that I really enjoyed about White Knight in the original 8 books was its willingness to set us down in a universe that has already been existing. We don't need the Bruce Wayne backstory. We don't need to see Jason Todd be Robin yet. We don't need to see Dick Grayson be Robin. We don't need to see Barbara Gordon become Batgirl. We don't need to get the origin stories for these characters because this story is operating on the idea that the people reading this already know at least the basics about Batman and the wider Gotham and DC world. And by having that, you don't need to take up time retelling the story that every single DC comic fan and every single DC fan knows. We don't need to know about Martha and Thomas. We don't need to know about the Robins and how they came to be. We're just kind of in this accepted world where things are happening and we get to be along for the ride. We get to see the new plot. We get to see the new character dynamics that are happening. That is really admirable. And it's really nice and it's kind of refreshing to not have to rehash plots and backstories again and again and again. If things are different, we can build upon that. And the White Knight universe does build upon that by building things backwards, by giving us the alternative backstories. And it's not so different that it's you need to be told every little step of every person's backstory. What you're told that's different is just kind of accepted into the universe, but whatever general knowledge you come into knowing about the DC universe and the Bat fam in general, you can just kind of use to navigate this universe and the characters. To go along with the characters I really admire the way that the creative team was willing to have these characters age, to have Batman become an old man, to have characters show physical signs of aging. Like Harley Quinn shows that she's getting older throughout the different stories. We see that in the artwork. We see children grow up. We see the change in dynamics. You kind of get the feel that things are happening even though we don't see them. We don't know what's going on, like what the exact steps were taken by Barbara Gordon and Dick Grayson. We just know that they were having something in the background and they did have a child later on. We don't see all of someone's life, but we get the feeling that life kept going, that they just didn't stop when they stopped being shown for a bit. It's as if you are seeing this from one person's point of view, from several people's point of view, and they lost contact or it wasn't relevant. You don't need to know everything, but it doesn't leave it so empty that it feels like you're just waiting for them to show back up, for them to get something else to happen. I also appreciate some of the story's willingness to change dynamics between characters, to approach them, to have them change as time goes on. And I feel like the first real big example of that is Harley Quinn and Batman. And while I'm not a huge fan of them ending up together or having a romantic relationship, I appreciate the fact that they were willing to build on that the story was willing to continue to advance on that and continue to allow them to have problems that they need to consistently answer for, and that these characters still have the flaws even though they're getting better, and like there's phases where they are really close, and that's mostly to do with plot, but just the willingness to have dynamics between characters change and to have struggle. And I find that admirable in the sense of just how little space this universe has. There's 40 issues max in this series, and each of them are broken up into parts. And the fact that like they are able to tackle any relationship dynamic change at all is really fascinating. To go along with that thought, also the willingness to try new things with characters. And while I agree and definitely think that for a lot of the times it didn't quite work out well, it was the willingness to try different things with these characters, to make them tick in different ways, to switch up the order of the Robins, to have these characters be in different roles. It's fascinating, and honestly, the fact that they were able to do this is very different compared to a lot of other established universes where it's kind of expected, where they have to stay the same. So to see characters change fundamentally is really interesting, and in some cases, it's really appreciative that you can explore different types of characters within the same character umbrella. And while I do have my complaints and I'll bring them up later, I do admire the willingness to try new things, to ask what would happen if we changed this. Speaking of characters, something I really enjoyed about this universe is I thought Gan was amazing. She's my favorite character. I don't think I have ever told anyone that, but Gan, I love her story. I love how she is a completely different Robin from Jason, and I like the failed mentorship between the two of them, and how Jason doesn't become perfect simply because he's in charge of someone, and he helps Gan because of spite. And I love that she realizes at the very end of the story, the earlier part of the story, that she wants to be someone else. She doesn't want to continue to hurt people, but she wants to open a hand. She wants to be open and try and help people that way. But also how she realizes that, like, it's not the only answer. Sometimes you do have to raise a fist. And I really like her design. I also like the artwork of the Red Hood from the Presents. I thought that artwork was amazing, and while I don't wish the whole series, all of 40 issues were in that artwork, I would not mind seeing a return to that. I also really liked how she was part of the Backport community. One of my complaints actually has to do with the communities and the characters we see between the communities, but if I had to pick a character that I remember being from a community, it's Gan, because Gan feels like she's connected to the community, to the people who live in a community. Her willingness to help and try to continue helping, even though we know that there's plot going on in the background with the rise of the GTO and the militarization of the GTO, that even though we know those things are happening in the background, the continued Gan's continuousness to her community and her dedication to protecting and upholding her community, she is the character that I really think encapsulates a member of the community, and a sort of elevated member of the community, someone who takes on the protector role, who takes on a nurturing role in the sense of helping the people, but in the sense that she's still very much part of the community. She doesn't leave it behind the same way that I believe Duke does, but that's for another section. But definitely one of my favorite parts and what I did enjoy about White Knight was the inclusion of the new character Gang. Another thing that I really liked, and this is just like a small note, I like the McGinnis family. Terry is one of my favorite characters ever. I was a huge fan of the DCAU. Batman Beyond was my favorite Batman installment, and I really did like that this universe brought them in. And I do have a laundry list of complaints with the story that Terry got, but I did like that they brought the McGinnis family and they were willing to just dive right in. Here's a new family that here's a name everyone can, every DC fan has at least a knowledge of at this point because of the influence of the DCAU onto fandom space and just the space, general knowledge of the comic books and TV shows. So I did really enjoy the McGinnis family, and I wish we could see more of them to go along with characters I like, and this is probably becoming a little bit elongated for talking about favorite characters, but Marion and Ivy were really sweet. While I do think that Marion was just kind of we can't do Harley and Ivy, so we can do Marion and Ivy, I did like how sweet they were, and I did think that the storyline with Marion and Ivy in Generation Joker was really interesting, and I was to want any sort of expansion, I'd want an Ivy story, and I'll bring that up a bit later again. But definitely I did like the way that they we don't know what's happening with them. We see Marion in the first installment, we see her again a bit halfway through this universe, and then we see her again at the end. I do like how they feel like consistent characters, as if in the background her and Ivy are just exploring their relationship, that they get to the point where they call Marion will call Ivy her wife. I do like how they're not a main focus characters. They were never main focus characters, but things are happening with them. We know things are happening with them, and it becomes relevant in some parts, but they're just kind of allowed to continue existing within the universe. It's not as if they're a one and done type character. To go along with the universe, I do like how the story was willing to build forwards and try to build backwards at the same time, to see how the past connects to the future and how that idea connects to the theme, a big theme within this universe. And while I have, again, a very big list of complaints with how the story was told and specifically elements used within these stories, but I do like how when it was relevant, the past was brought up. When it was relevant to the continuation of the universe, it was brought up, that the past continues to affect the future. I do like that because oftentimes within comic books, at some point the past stops mattering. But within this universe, the past is very relevant because the past is where these choices were made that continue to affect the characters that exist now. I did really like Jackie and Bryce as they were really interesting in that you could show the effects that the previous stories had on the universe, on characters that were impacted, that you get to see just how the past is handled in their lives, how Harley was hiding stuff from them, how she wasn't telling them about Jack. It really showed a new dimension to the story, what happens now, that not all characters are going to know everything, and now you have these characters who don't know anything, and I feel like that's a dynamic and a thing that doesn't happen a lot in these stories that deal with multi-generational heroes or multi-generational families, especially in comic book worlds where family members get swapped out like playing cards every other week with someone new and new focuses. But with a small dedicated universe, you can really focus in on the generational happenings between families, between mothers and children, between random uncle type characters and stuff like that. And to go along with the theme that I brought up earlier, the consistency in the way this story wants to handle legacy. And I think that that's a common theme that connects all of this, that in the first one, Jack wanted to leave behind a legacy, and it was a question of, Bruce, what legacy are you leaving behind by doing this? In Curse of the White Knight, it was about legacy of those before you, what your ancestors were doing and how it affects you today. And in the Von Fries one, it was about the legacy of atrocities that continue to have on the people today and the stuff that's happening today. And then you have Beyond and the legacy that you don't control. Like, Batman / Bruce Wayne has no control over what's happening. He's in jail, he's cut everyone off, he's let himself lose control of his legacy, of his name, of Batman, and what becomes of it once like control is taken away. And then the presents Harley Quinn is about the legacy between people and the actions taken and the consequences of those actions, of what Ethel was doing, about the legacy of celebrities and celebrity families, about how complicated they can be, about how love is sometimes not enough, about how love can be dangerous and can be toxic. And then Red Hood is about the legacy that you have to try and do something about. Like, Jason wants to train Gan, and the realization that once that legacy is passed on, once there's someone else taking on a legacy, that they need to shape it the way they wish to show it, that you can't create someone into another version of you. And then Generation Joker is a lot about legacy. It's about the legacy that gets left behind, that you can't control, that like the legacy that the outside world has waiting for you, about what other people remember you as, what other people will note you as being, the way that other people are going to be impacted by the legacy of others. So I found all of these quite enjoyable about the White Knight universe.
Before I have Nines' response, they asked me to mention that they're French, and so they pronounce a few things in the French way in the middle of English sentences.
Alright, so to preface this, I want to start by saying that I didn't get introduced to White Knight in a normal way, so my experiences with it will all be tainted by the fact that I did not get into it in a normal way. Since I got into Batman through the Lego movie, I read White Knight specifically for Bat Joe. What I remember very deeply about like the book and rereading it is, God, okay, I have a lot of issues with fantasy D&D in general,
but at least White Knight was funny about it. I liked White Knight for the art first. I'm not sure that anyone can, like, I don't know if everyone agrees, but at least to me, the art is absolutely banger. I really like Sean Murphy's art style as much as I don't like his writing style. So there's that. Otherwise, I do like the later books. I liked Beyond, I liked Harley Quinn, I like what I've read of Generation Joker. I'm just stopping because I've read a lot over the past few days, so takes are not with Generation Joker in mind. And I think that once you get past the fact that everyone is horribly out of character, there are some sweet character moments between like the characters as they are in White Knight, as much as they're not much like the actual characters at all. I do like Joker. I thought she was gonna be called Riot. That was disappointing to me because in my mind, I don't remember why, but I was sure that she was gonna be Riot. And I do I'm kind of half and half on the portrayal of Harley Quinn. I do think it's interesting. I'm not entirely sure how I 100% feel about it, but it does work with the whole, yeah, she was a smart psychiatrist. She was good at what she did, etc, etc. But also, I did not understand why they changed the backstory from one book to another, kind of. But I do like that she like has her shit together and she always looks fucking hot in that comic, and she's not like overtly sexualized, she just looks like a MILF, which is a bonus point for me specifically.
This book had a lot of problems. Some would say that it had more cons than pros. Most would, actually, which generally isn't great for any series, which makes it so surprising that several of these runs have been bestsellers. That's just unbelievable. This is so bad, and I hate most of it. Like, for example, the entirety of Curse of the White Knight. That run is just bad. It's so weird. The portrayal of John Paul Valley, the politics that are somehow more suspect than the politics in the original. The Joker is solidly messed up. He straight up just kills all the other rogues, therefore killing off any potential at using most of the most interesting Batman characters on the roster. He leaves Poison Ivy and Mad Hatter alive, but we never see Hatter again, and Ivy is not utilized as much as she could be. And in a story about a Batman villain, I'd hope for more than one of them to be actively used in future aspects of the story. But no, actually, I'm going to touch on these politics again. They're insane. Who could rationally think any of this is a good idea? And then they're completely dropped by the time Presents Harley Quinn comes around. That's probably the best thing to happen regarding the politics, but still, who let this through? It's so bad. I do not like it. It's also so clear that the author doesn't read superhero comic books, especially not Batman comics, or engage with superhero media outside of like Frank Miller. There's absolutely no understanding of the way Batman works as a superhero and the entire point of the character. Also, why the hell are there Nazis? God, before I start ranting, I'm gonna let everyone else say their bit. Russ, you're up.
Oh gosh, where do I start? It's clear Murphy has never picked up a Batman comic book for any worth in his life. Firstly, the concept itself is overdone and a misinterpretation of Batman, as well as being uselessly and hopelessly edgy. Secondly, he has zero respect for one of the most fundamental parts of Batman mythos. Robin. Robin is Dick Grayson's, his mother's name for him, his name that was never meant to be a legacy, but became one anyway. Robin is his family's colors, a representation of hope and joy despite. That's why making Jason the first Robin and making it so Dick took on the name, because he's a fan of Batman and Robin, due to forgetting what order the Robins come in, then going with it so's a startling lack of care, and is stupid alongside that, because Dick's from a traveling circus. Batman and Robin were not of international, or likely even interstate fame. Thirdly, his use of Nazis is frankly weird and also fucking unnecessary. It could have been a secret underground organization, and it would have made no difference. Also, on this point, he is fucking weird about people of color, and black people specifically. His use of Duke is genuinely disgusting, as if Murphy gave a shit and read comics. He could have literally just used regular Duke. He'd have to do some origin tweaking BC. He wants Duke to be on Jack's side, but literally regular and teenage Duke could have worked. It's so like, it's a kind of disrespect and lack of care that's racist flavored. It's a character built off of racist stereotypes that's only there so Jack could have a black man on his side supporting him to make him look less like a white savior. Which he very much fucking is. And on that point, The politics are frankly awful and unnecessary considering they matter for around half of White Knight. Then asterisk never again, asterisk Jack, being a white knight is explicitly said to be, because of how asterisk white asterisk he is. As only a white man can save those poor black and brown people. It's fucking gross. Fourthly, his psychology talk is painful and uninformed. It's clearly backed by how needlessly edgy he is and is making this series, where it gives me a headache to read. Those are actual disorders, Sean. Fifth, Curse of the White Knight is genuinely the worst fucking book I have ever read. It was painful, nonsensical, and can barely even be called an interpretation of JPV for how useless it is. It is pointless and awful, and I hope it burns in a fucking fire. Sixth, Beyond had shamefully little of the twins, which is a shame. Murphy also doesn't even get the twins, he needs to piss right off. Seventh, I'm sure you get my point by now.
The pacing is a bit of a mess. A lot of big plot beats squished into little panel time. Lots of concepts to chew on, which is good, but often lacking follow-through. The timeline is a non-existent mess, as what logically makes sense versus what Murphy obviously had in mind are conflicting heavily, which makes it a headache to follow. In addition, I found that the three main authors have very conflicting views on the book itself. Murphy's edgy Batman story vision is very different from Colin's softer touch and McCormick's generally good writing, which means that their versions of the characters, the origins and personalities are way different. Jarringly so. It makes it hard to keep track of even. Makes for very confusing reading sometimes if you want a coherent narrative.
Well said. Oniki's been in my DMs for a while recounting the horrors of their reread, and here's generally what they got from it.
Where to start? I feel like that is a question that when I was looking at the initial question, where do I start? Where do I start dissecting my problems with the problematicness of certain storylines, of the inconsistencies, of the character changes that do not bode well? And I feel like the first place to start is with the story itself, not the nitty-gritty details, but how cramped this story feels, how even with 40 issues, they're trying to fit so many subplots that makes the story feel cramped, how trying to focus on all these characters can make a story feel cramped, especially when you're dealing with 8 issues or 6 issues. The way that it leaves behind certain story elements that could bring a second and third dimension to the plot, but how this feels like it sometimes falls face down. The way that in the first one they try and feed in a Nazi subplot with all these other things happening in the first one, trying to fit in a political career for Jack, trying to fit in this notion that the people are having these rallies and these marches and are protesting and trying to tackle terms of legacy, of trying to tackle the character dimensions between Harley and Jack, between Marion and Jack, between Marion and Harley, between Bruce and the GTO, and there's so many plots going on already that by having all these plots that it's hard to connect them all together. That doesn't make it feel like this has been compressed, as if there's 4 missing issues. So the story does feel compressed. It does feel as if there is missing issues, as if we're getting the direct purview version instead of the director's cut. We're looking at the theatric version instead of the full version. And one place where this really fails is the women within the story. And how the Bechdel test, I wanted to see how long it took to get this done. And the first confirmed place that I could put that the Bechdel test was passed was when Harleen and Marion were talking about tea after Harleen thought that Marion was involved in the plot. That is the first place that I can really pin that the Bechdel test was passed. And I feel like that is just a bit of a problem, especially when you have female newscaster, you have Barbara Gordon, you have Renee Montoya, you have Harley, you have Marion, you have these female characters, except none of them interact. And that is a huge problem when it takes halfway through the universe, where it takes until it presents Harley Quinn for the Bechdel test to be passed. A very simple test that all media should actually be passing with flying colors. And to go along with these female characters, the passiveness of them and the way that they serve a purpose to the male character narrative. That Barbara Gordon is constantly the in-between for Batman and Nightwing, between Bruce Wayne and Dick Grayson. She's being the one that's... The only time she gets mad in the first entries of this series is because the two of them, because the lack of talking that they are doing, the two of them. And she never feels angry for herself. She feels angry because of the men in her life. And she is attacked by Joker because of her connection to Jim Gordon, because of her connection to Bruce Wayne. She's not attacked because she's Barbara Gordon. She's still attacked because she's the daughter of Jim Gordon, because she's a Batgirl of the whole dynamic. She's not... It doesn't feel like she is her own person. She's always the extension of another character, an often male character. And even Harley, with her own entry and how much roles she plays in this universe, how interconnected her backstory is with Jack. And I love the willingness to explore that they knew each other before Joker in Arkham Asylum, but just how interconnected her backstory feels makes it feel like it's almost impossible to separate her from Jack. It's as if she's, again, an extension of a character, an extension of a story. And even when Jack and Bruce aren't there, it still feels like she's constantly playing second fiddle to these characters. Even when in Presents, when it's Quimby, like, she still feels as if she's an extension, as if she's not the main character of that story, even with her name there. And it may be me looking too far into things, but it takes until Gan, or like these, Gan, even though being a main character, she's a background or a secondary character to the universe. She's a woman of color, and out of the women of color in this series, you have the news reporter, you have the elitist that Joker conspires with, and you have Montoya. And there's several other women of color, like you have Misako McGinnis, and you have several other background characters. But it takes until Gan for her to play a major role in a story that's not background, that she's a main character, that her decisions completely matter to the story, where it doesn't feel like she's playing the attack dog of the Joker, where it doesn't feel like she's just another police officer or a police commissioner that shows up when she needs to show up. She's not a newscaster that shows up when they need to advance the plot. She feels like she's a character who makes choices, who does have autonomy in the universe. And to go along with women and their roles in this universe, there is a lot of the female characters in the story go on to being characters in nurturing or even mother roles. You have Harley, who becomes a mother of two. You have Barbara, who is a mother, and like some of her plot in the Beyond is that she can't be there for her son. You have Leslie, who's a doctor, who is shown to look after the Jackie and Bryce when Harley's away. You have Misako, who is a mom, and then you even have Gan, who is in a nurturing position of her community. And while Gan, it feels like part of her character, her whole character arc was about opening a hand, about wanting to be a different Robin. But to have a large amount of the female characters to go on to be mothers or be in these nurturing roles, it takes away and almost feels like they can't be anything else. And to the fact that it takes until the Generation Joker for there to really be significant female characters in these non-nurturing roles, where before then the only character that I could name that wasn't in this non-nurturing role was Montoya. And none of these characters, speaking of police, none of them are ever truly against the police or the government, and the way that they all are just passive and allow the government and the GTO to continue to become fascistic and to grow in power, where none of them are really opposition to it, where the GCPD is the good police. None of these characters truly encapsulate an anti-police or an anti-government stance. And again, first of all, propaganda, but also the way that bodes for the universe, that we don't see any character be truly against this, that it makes the universe feel flat. Where even with the protests that were happening in the original series, the way that protest almost goes into a riot, where the only reason it doesn't is because Jack says, oh, please don't, please don't. It's kind of like a white guy placating the people who are being discriminated and marginalized, and that sends a weird message. But the fact that we don't see anyone protest this, we don't see a truly anti-government stance, where all these characters end up working with a GCPD or end up working alongside former GTO officer Dick Grayson, that you don't see characters truly hold any of this against them, that you see it being mentioned in passing. Gan says something in passing, and Barbara says something in passing, but Barbara is the commissioner of the GCPD, and Gan still ends up going to help. You don't see a character who truly holds the police or the connections to the police against anyone, against everyone. To the point where you have Duke Thomas, you have Azrael, Jean Paul Valley, you have Jason Todd, and you have these characters who were former military, who did go into police roles. The interconnectedness of the government and the police and all of these characters' lives mean that none of them can ever truly take a stance that makes the universe feel nuanced, that makes the universe feel like there might be characters who don't truly agree with everything going on. To go along with what I mentioned before with the protest, we don't see enough of civilians in this universe. We don't see another full-fledged, protest with dialogue. We get mentioned protests, we get mentioned people, against the system, but we don't see them. We don't see a full protest. We don't know what those protesters' signs say. We don't know what their chants are. We don't know what they are demanding. We hear about them, we are told about them, but because we don't see them, it makes it feel like it's less important. As if what they're doing is of lesser importance, that it doesn't have a true sticking point, that the regular civilians don't really matter in this universe. To go along with single character things that I have problems with, and I have a whole list of them. My first one is just Old Man Jean Paul Valley. The thing is that Jean Paul in the regular Batverse and the regular timeline, and I'm talking I've only really read the New 52, but he is this character in the same age range of Barbara Gordon and Dick Grayson, and Helena Bertinelli. He's meant to be this graduate student age, 24 to 27, but he's an old man who was part of the military and the operations that his team in the military were part of has implications for this universe that, first of all, I'm all for making characters problematic and having them be connected to problematic things, but the continued connection that all these characters have to military, to government, to police, along with the missions that his team were part on and been on and were part of, it has implications for this universe that make it feel very problematic, that make it Jean Paul feel incredibly separated from what his character is in normal Batman timeline. The past. The Edmund Wayne storyline with the Baccars and Lafayette Arkham. The whole storyline of who really owns Gotham, who has a right to Gotham, has problems because it implies that, first of all, European males and the whole owning of land didn't ever belong to them. But also the way that Gotham has always been portrayed as the cesspool of human sin. And the way it feels like Gotham will corrupt everyone who's there, that everyone there has something inherently wrong with them. I don't like that. I don't like the implications it has on mental health and the way people can, in many ways, choose to engage with their mental health and try to improve their mental health. It does not feel... It feels slimy. The future. Derek Powers' storyline, and his reveal was very underwhelming. I have problems with the way his character is characterized and the way that the characters he's shown manipulating are minors, and he's shown to manipulate them in his weird limo car. It feels slimy and disgusting, but the way that his story is handled and beyond could be more interesting. In DCAU, his whole thing was a little bit of a mystery, a little bit of a shadow player in the background. But we know exactly who he is, we know exactly what he's doing at every time, and we know he's manipulating these characters, and we see him become Blight. I wish that it had been a little bit more of a mystery, as if he'd already been Blight at this point, and he's still manipulating things from the background. He still has control, but we don't know that he still has control. I feel like that could have been a really interesting storyline to have it be a little bit of a mystery, when the whole one of the things is that there are mysteries within the Batman universe. The way that these characters forgive each other, especially in the Beyond books, is annoying. The way that Babs and Dick, they just have one conversation where Babs is the one who relents, first of all, spells for the way that their relationship dynamic works, but it also makes it feel like Dick never did anything wrong, when in fact he has been doing things wrong. He was part of increasing the power of the GTO, of separating the GTO from the GCPD, of creating this militaristic company that could do whatever it wanted and was testing military equipment. The way that Dick and Bruce get back into good hands, and just the way that no one has any problems with these characters who switch sides. No one has problems with Duke Thomas when he leaves. No one has problems with Dick Grayson when he leaves. No one has problems with Barbara Gordon being a commissioner. No one has problems with the power dynamics of the implications of what these characters were part of. It's as if they're just waking up from brainwashing. Duke Thomas. The fact that he is the tokenized person of color in the original series, and then he goes on to being a major role of the GTO. He was military, he was GTO, he was police, and he was a middle-aged Robin as well as being a gang leader. I don't like it. I don't like what they have done to Duke Thomas's character. Duke Thomas existed. It wasn't like he had a huge 80-year history that you could pick things from. When this universe started, he was a new character. He had relatively few storylines, and it would be hard to mess up his character, but it feels like that at every point, they found a way to mess up his character, to make it feel not like Duke Thomas, but as another character that they had to slap a recognizable name onto. To go along with previous statement on mothers within this universe, but in the Murphyverse, the way that none of the mothers can really ever be seen as truly good mothers. I'm good with showing complicated dynamics and how motherhood is hard, but the way that all of the mother characters who have names, who are part of the story, are shown as being not great mothers. Harley Quinn just, like, she's allowing her kids to ride hyenas. She's constantly forgetting that her kids exist. She's forgetting that she's a mother. She's leaving one of them behind. She's prioritizing one over the other. Then you have Starlet, you have Ethel and the relationship between her and Quimby, and then you have Quimby's mom and the relationship between her and Quimby, and then you have all of these problematic mothers that none of them ever really seem to wanted to be moms. That they kind of, it feels like an obligation within the story that they need to be there. Even Barbara Gordon's like, I can't be there for my kid because of my job, and is shown to kind of leave behind her kid. That kind of feels just, it feels bad to have most of the mothers in your story be bad moms, as if all moms in this universe are bad or failing in some ways. Even Terry's mom, Masako, is having problems, is like shown to, I think she's the most non-problematic mom in this universe. So, you know, great job Masako for that, by the way. But her talk with Terry about like how he was hiding things because he didn't want to disappoint her, but how she wants to be a better mom, how she wants to be part of his life, and she wants to make up for that fact. That is the best mom in this universe. But all of the other like main not background or side characters, all of those moms are problematic at best. Children, and I feel like this is a good segue, the way that all of the legacy children have names of previous characters. You have Jimmy, who is Bab and Dick's kid, who is named after Jim Gordon. Then you have Jackie and Bryce, who are named after Jack and Bruce. None of these characters have original names. It feels like they're always going to be constantly connected to the past, to the legacy of someone else. And I guess that really fits into the theme of legacy. But it feels like whatever choices they make are always going to be haunted by the men that they are named after, by the simple fact that they don't have original names, that they don't have unconnected names. They're always going to be someone else's legacy. They're always going to be connected to someone else's legacy. It almost gets rid of the autonomy of these characters to be their own person, because their story is always going to be intrusively connected to someone else's character, to someone else's story, to those decisions of those characters. To focus in on mental health for a moment, the way that it is portrayed, the way that struggling with identity, of struggling with separate identities, the way that systems are treated, the way that Joker is treated as the evil one for most of this series, the way that this story treats the need for prescription drugs for mental health, the way that characters treat their own mental health. And I'm fine with characters struggling with their own mental health, but the rampant way that mental health is treated within this universe, whether it be personality, whether it be PTSD, whether it be the way that characters interact with their mental health, it doesn't feel good. Because when you have Jack, who's struggling with this evil version of himself, and I'm putting that in the general sense here, it feels like the general stereotype everyone has for people who have systems. It feels like as if all of the characters who do have personality issues tend to be these these villain characters, you see a character who's struggling with suicidal Marion is taken by the Joker and then is put under a sense of ownership role that like her mental health relies on her connection to the Joker. You have Bruce, who doesn't bode well with panic attacks and is almost like has a very negative view on his own mental health to the point that it impacts the way the story tells about it. You have just the way that all these characters' mental health is, like, all these characters who do have extreme mental health problems or image issues are these villain characters, or characters who very easily can be painted as villains, as Batman can be very easily painted as a villain, especially with the context of what he did in the first series, of the context of like his view on his own family legacy. Like, none of these characters who do struggle with mental health have a good view on themselves or their prospects of the future, and their bad mental health and descent into madness is almost treated as an inevitable instead of something that they personally can do something about, where they're always going to struggle with mental health, but it's the way that they decide to interact with it. But it always just feels inevitable. The last thing I have to say, and this is the last statement, and actually this comes from Burrito, but this should have been a Two-Face story. I don't feel like I have to explain this, but the dualities, the having a character who did have prospects in the legal and police department, but still having a supervillain, that a maniacal, ingenious supervillain. This should have been a Two-Face story, and the use of Two-Face and Generation Joker is a disservice to his character. But yeah, this universe should have been about Two-Face. I think there's this one panel, I'm not exactly sure where it was, but it was where Jack and Joker were almost split halfway down, and that could have been an amazing moment with Two-Face, to see that he still is Two-Face, the reveal that he's been masterminding this plan the whole time. But it feels almost believable as if the story had been a Two-Face story, if Two-Face had magically been cured, because there have been stories where he's been cured, where he's gotten plastic surgery, where he has done things. They had done it in the DCAU, they've done it in several different universes, that where he has gotten surgery, where things have almost gotten better, but then he backslides again. That it's an established storyline that they have done before, and it's a storyline that you can do 1,001 twists on. So to not have this be a Two-Face story almost feels like a missed opportunity. And I know Joker and Bruce are always going to be seen as number one enemy, number one hero, but the connection between Bruce and Harvey could have showed a really intriguing plot point and connection between the two of them, as Bruce starting to get to know Harvey again, but Harvey is continuing going down and manipulating things in the background. It could have been an interesting juxtaposition of the two of them becoming friends again after they had been enemies for a while, after Two-Face had been in Arkham, had been doing supervillain stuff. So I feel like that's a bit of a missed opportunity and really interesting character dynamics that you don't need to spend a lot of time introducing and making them friends like they did in Batman Beyond with the hologram Jack and Bruce. That time could have been used doing something else, because we would have already established that Bruce and Harvey could be friends, that they already had that dynamic going on for them, and that all those panels being taken up by Jack and Bruce's dynamic could have been diverted to Terry or to Jackie or to the story in general, and growing the story beyond Bruce, beyond what Bruce's story was, because this universe is starting to move past him, where his role in this universe isn't the main focus anymore.
Now, I am so sorry for having made Nines read parts of this Elseworld that they haven't yet, but here's what they have to say anyways.
Now, for the things that I didn't like about White Knight. So, I think that this deserves to go book by book, but I'm just gonna give you a summary by rereading my notes. First off, Bruce, at the beginning of White Knight, is so incredibly stupid. It's just he's so dumb. Everyone can tell he's upset when Jack Napier appears. Everyone can tell that, like, it's personal. How has it not been found out? Why are people surprised that he's Batman when somewhat, like, he's entirely forgotten about being Bruce Wayne? Is it just, huh? You know? Also, I won't be criticizing the whole, like, grimdark Batman trope, because I think that since it's what the entire book relies upon, if I start criticizing that, then there was really nothing left to be enjoyable. Babs, at the beginning of White Knight, she's dumb as shit as well. Like, both Bruce and her are fucking dumb. I also dislike that the Joker's saw. I know that we're told that he's a big bad guy, but from the times that he's on screen and from what we know about him, like, all that he was convicted of was like assault and stealing cars, something like that, and robbery, I can't remember. Which, yeah, those are crimes, but it's a far cry from mass murderer Joker with toxin-induced death, you know? Like, he doesn't have Joker toxin. He doesn't have most of the gimmicks that he usually has. Just, he doesn't really feel like Joker. And I know that that's kind of the point and all, but he's also like, yeah, you know? Also, I don't know how much I like that it's taking a quote-unquote realistic approach to Batman, since at that point, Bruce has been Batman for like 20 years, since he's in his 60s in Beyond, and it's been like 10-15 years since the beginning of White Knight. So how the fuck has he not been arrested yet? That is the thing I want to know. Like, if it's supposed to be a grimdark approach, and like, what adventures has Batman had? Because, you know, if Bruce Wayne fugitive and all that is canon to White Knight, why the fuck hasn't been Batman arrested yet? Like, I know that Gordon is protecting his ass probably, but why hasn't the FBI gotten involved sooner in the mess that's going on in Gotham? Why isn't the Joker dead? Like, if you want to go realistic approach to Batman, just go full on with it. Or just let the reader suspend their disbelief and don't criticize the genre you're taking a part of, you know? Also, I hate the fact that Dick is a pseudo-Tim. Just, what the fuck? You know? And clearly Sean Murphy knows nothing about Duke Thelmuth, which will be a recurring theme about the author not knowing anything about the character he writes about. Also, Evil Waynes. Great job turning a Jewish family into people who worked with Nazis. You know, like, awesome, dude. Then, minor criticism. Babs is OOC. She's so ride or die, and for what? She's not that ride or die in comics. She calls Bruce out to his face. Jesus. Also, I dislike the Fries plot. Sorry, I do not care about the Mr. Freeze plot. All of this sucks. Both Bruce and Joker suck. I also don't like the pseudo-deity. It's just dumb. Yeah. Also, a severe case of Bruce being OOC again. He would not fucking say that. He would not admit out loud that he's scared of reading Alfred's note. Just in general, it's a Bruce who's way less in control. Or, like, seemingly in control anyways. It's just, yeah. Also, at some point, they all get buddy-buddy again without making any sort of amends. They just have a change of heart. Also, Renee is part of the narrative, but I don't think we're ever given her first name. She's irrelevant. She's like girl power, girl boss, yada yada yada. She has 5 lines of dialogue and we're never given her first name. Lamau. And the end is also edgy just for the sake of edgy. Like, you could have just had Harley and Jack get married. The edge was unnecessary. When it comes to Curse of the White Knight, I'm just gonna glaze over it for now and say that as a Jean Paul Valley fan, it was basically unreadable. Because that's the part where I talk about what I would fix the most. So for now, just ignore it entirely. Yada yada yada. We're in Harley Quinn. I don't have much to say about Harley Quinn. It's just, the plot is mid. The plot twists are predictable as shit. I knew it was gonna be, like, I knew Hector was gonna be tangled in all the mess very soon. It's very predictable. It's not bad, it's just not good. Tiny nitpick is, why the fuck did Jack have dog tags? He was not military. Heart emoji. Then, for Batman Beyond, I also don't have that much criticism. Just, they're all out of character, but they're not more out of character than before that, even though Dick is Tim and I do not get that. But points for Gan being there. Like, Gan is here making the book instantly 10 times better. Yeah, I think that it's really funny the way that Bruce and Jack are in that comic. But yeah, also, the politics of this book, I'll say that again, the French accent was horrendous. The politics of this book are all over the place. It's just, I do not know whether Sean Murphy is a fascist or not. I do not know whether Sean Murphy likes the police state or not. I genuinely cannot fucking tell who I'm supposed to root for. Like, who this book is bringing up. I cannot tell. Yeah, it's awful. I don't know what the politics are in this book. Like, I know they're right wing, because it screams that at me. But it's so muddled. I do not get it. But yeah. Also, tiny nitpick once again. There's a line where Dick is like, boo-hoo, why are you using guns, Jason? Bruce has a rule against that. They have been using guns since White Knight. Since the original book. All of them have been using guns. What the fuck are you talking about, brother? So, for my additional notes, what I really wanted to talk about was the representation of mental health issues in White Knight. More specifically, I wanted to talk about Bruce, Jack, and Jean-Paul Valley, and how their portrayal of what is essentially fantasy DID for two of them, and whatever JPV has got going on, is simply not the best that you could do in comics, and how it kind of really pisses me off. To start, I really wanted to talk about Jean-Paul Valley because, as you've probably guessed from the 40 minutes long text about me rewriting Curse of the White Knight, I did not enjoy his portrayal in the slightest. Ever since he was introduced in 1992, Jean-Paul Valley has been a DID system. He's had DID since the very first time it was introduced in Sword of Azrael. It's an integral part of his character. More specifically, he's always been a Ramkoa system. Ramkoa stands for ritual abuse, mind control, and organized abuse. Essentially, he was tortured into having DID by the Order of St. Dumas, to make it very simple. And one of the things that I liked the most about how Dennis O'Neil wrote Azrael through Azrael, the Nightfall Saga, and then Azrael Agent of the Bat, was that Jean-Paul Valley was never actually a villain. He was an antagonist, he did bad things, but he was never actually a villain. Both his DID and the psychosis that he experiences as... My opinion is that it's a symptom of PTSD rather than a condition on its own, since it only appears after he gets triggered. All throughout the entire run and the entire life of his character pre-Rebirth, the entire time, he's not a villain, he's an antagonist, and most people know about the panel of him choking Robin, but no one seems to know about the context leading up to that, or his reaction to it afterwards. He's never really been a villain, which obviously isn't the case in White Knight. And one of the other main differences, and what I've noted when I was reading on White Knight, is that the original Jean-Paul Valley doesn't really have a support system. His dad died, and he basically has no friends that we know of before he meets Brian, but that's way later on, after Nightfall. And essentially he's on his own, and he's dealing with what is certainly one of the most dire mental health situations I've ever seen in comics. And so, he copes and doesn't cope. But from what it looks like, Jean-Paul Valley in White Knight does have a support system. He has Gabriel and Michael and I don't know the rest, who are there for him. Like, they're his friends, they've known him for a long time, and they're here through, his cancer diagnosis. And since he doesn't seem to have DID, and he just seems to have, quote-unquote, just seems to have psychosis, and it raises the question of, 1, why he's not medicated, 2, why he's not in therapy, 3, why his friends are enabling him through his delusions and hallucinations. I'm not talking about, I don't exactly know what they would have done, but it just seems to me that for a man who does have people looking out for him, no one actually does. Which is kind of a nonsense to me. But the part that really pisses me off is that Azrael in the original comics is just his great representation. In White Knight, it's just used to make him a villain, which sucks for obvious reasons, and Sean Murphy isn't even particularly interesting about it. None of the hallucinations and delusions are personal. None of them tug on my heartstrings the ways that Jean-Paul Valley's did in Nightfall, for example. None of them seem particularly interesting, and we don't even see that many of them, which to me kind of defeats the whole point. At that point, just make a different character who's military and wants to, and is like an evangelist, I don't know. It would have been more interesting than trying to fit in some parts of Jean-Paul Valley while entirely denying the rest. Yeah. And the second person that I wanted to touch on was the duality between Joker and Jack. Mostly because I think that it's just a really uninteresting way to go about it. So I'll be comparing him a lot to Two-Face from like the main continuity. Mostly because I think that while there were a lot of ups and downs about how Two-Face was portrayed, one thing that he has always been, at least in recent comic history, is interesting. Mostly because you have Harvey Dent and you have Two-Face, and both of them are written separately and as people. Like, you know that Two-Face is a bad guy, and you know that Harvey Dent for the most part was a good guy, but the lines blur sometimes, and most importantly, you see that Two-Face sometimes does good things, and you see that sometimes Two-Face does care about Harvey. It depends on which adaptations, I'll give you that. But especially in recent years, it's been more and more present that they are two people coexisting, and they're two people with their internal lives and their internal conflicts, and they could stand on their own, you know? If they were split up, a meat cleaver down the middle of the body, I don't know, they would both still be people. Meanwhile, when it comes to Jack and Joker, Joker, in the entirety of White Knight, has never once been written as a person. He has been written as a villain, a lot, and he's always like this sort of cartoonishly evil guy, with no real motivation on his own apart from, I want chaos. He doesn't want anything else, and I know that that's kind of true to how Joker is in canon, but it's really uninteresting when Sean Murphy is trying to make out Jack to have all this stuff going on with him, and then you turn back to the Joker and it's just, haha, roar, XD, I'm so random, I'm gonna kill your entire family. I think that for someone who is trying to make everyone more complex in just like 40 issues, he did not think about Joker as a character separate from Jack at all. I could not give you 3 personality traits that the Joker has apart from murderous, which, yeah, I think that in general, making it just triggered by falling into the acid vat is kind of shit on its own, mostly because, you know, that's not how DID works, but I'm willing to suspend my disbelief. I'm willing to put it behind me if you're making it interesting, which is why I don't have as much of an issue with the way that Bruce has a Jack chip in his brain, but I wanted to talk first about like the way that PTSD is shown in Bruce, mostly because it's a bit bland. It's not necessarily bad, but it's kind of just like giving the man panic attacks when he sees something he doesn't like. And while that is true for some people, I feel like Sean Murphy could have gone so much harder on it, and it's just kind of wasted potential there. He could have delved into how much everything about being Batman has affected Bruce and how much it shows as trauma, etc, etc. But we're so focused on whatever is going on with Harley, whatever is going on with the twins, whatever is going on with everything else. What was originally meant as a commentary on how Bruce is and how he's affected by his trauma just fades into the background. It becomes irrelevant fast enough, apart from the fact that hee-hee-hoo-hoo, Joker is taking control of my body. The reason why I think that it's not a good portrayal of even fantasy DID to have Joker share like a body with Bruce as a chip in his brain. But it is funny, so I'll give it the pass just for that. It's funny to have Joker and Bruce share a body and have Bruce like, I fucking hate you, and Joker, oh my god, we are literally best friends. It is funny to have big man and the twink on his arm that only him can see. That's the sole reason why this plotline even gets the pass, but it is comedic and it is funny. So, you know, that was kind of just my additional notes, I guess. Again, Jeanpool Valley in White Knight to me is straight up not Jeanpool Valley. And again, I think anyone would have written this better than Sean Murphy, and I think that his portrayal of Azriel in general really goes to show just how little he knows about this character, because if he'd only read, like, even just sort of Azriel 1992, even if he didn't want to read the 100 issues of Azriel, because I get it, it's long. I speedran it in like 2 days, but that's because I have issues. I get it, it's long, but even if he was just gonna read SOA or what Dan Waters has written on Azriel, he would have known. He would have known just, you know, he could have really just read sort of Azriel 2022 and called it a day, but no. He does not know anything about any of the character he writes about. And on top of that, he's incapable of opening a Wikipedia article on DAD.
Whoo boy, that was a lot of video, of editing in general. Thank you all for sticking around this long. We'll be coming back to a lot of this in the next 2 videos. Now that we have the guts of the books on the floor, we can throw back in some of our own ingredients. But we'll see that next time, listeners.
To all of you who have made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and please like the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you want to see more, and hit the notification bell if you want to see when I post the next 2 parts of this series. I want to give a special thanks to, as always, my lovely friend who provided the stills for us, for myself at least, and I also want to provide a very special thanks to all of those who participated, Aniki, Nines, and Russ. I really appreciate all the help that they gave me to creating this video and bringing this idea to life. So thank you very much to them, and I'll see you next time, listeners.